And my name is Jeff S. Grimes. This is my capstone project for the MIT xPRO Cybersecurity course, December 2023. The project assigned was to research and analyze the 2017 Equifax data breach, identifying issues that led to the incident, steps that could have been taken to prevent or mitigate the breach, and lessons learned from it. I compiled a point paper that has significantly more detail than this presentation, which serves as a recap of the main points of that paper. The 2017 Equifax breach. Equifax allowed the mismanagement of our personal information, inexcusable data security that led to the mass sensitive data exfiltration. The agenda, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the incident, talk about the vulnerability that was exploited, some governance and organizational issues I believe that contributed to the breach, root causes of the incident, the steps in the response, steps to mitigate or prevent the breach, and lessons learned from it, and some final thoughts about the impact of the breach. The Equifax data breach was a massive cybersecurity attack that exposed the personal information of over 147 million Americans, almost half of the US population, and 56% of its adults. Data that was exposed and exfiltrated was highly sensitive personal identifiable information, PII, first and last names, dates of birth, addresses, phone and social security numbers. The breach occurred between March and July of 2017 and was not made public until September of that year. The attackers were able to gain access to Equifax systems by exploiting a known vulnerability that had an available patch. Equifax failure to identify and patch the vulnerability led to one of the largest and most widely impacting data breaches in history. Equifax was heavily criticized for not only its overall lack of security posture and a disjointed response to the known vulnerability, but also its disclosure timing and steps taken to protect millions of consumers at risk due to the company's actions or lack thereof. Cybercriminals exploited a critical vulnerability, CVE 2017-5638, that was discovered and made public in Apache Struts, open source software framework that Equifax used on its online dispute resolution portal. The vulnerability in Apache Struts involved the processing of data sent to a server. Attackers could exploit this vulnerability by using file uploads to execute remote code, enabling them to send malicious code or commands to the server. The National Vulnerability Database's analysis indicated the complexity of exploiting this vulnerability was low. The potential impact on the compromised system's confidentiality, integrity, and availability was high. The vulnerability exposed sensitive data for exfiltration, impacting millions. To uncover the actors behind the Equifax theft, a broad and multinational investigative team led by the FBI's Atlanta field office tracked the crime's digital breadcrumbs, so to speak, back to the four co-conspirators who were members of the Chinese military and allegedly used servers in multiple countries and several different IP addresses to disguise the origin of the attack. In addition to the thefts of sensitive personal data, this is a case of state-sponsored computer intrusion and theft by China, targeting trade secrets, confidential business information, intelligence on individuals, which could be misused for a variety of other malicious activities. Here are some key dates that I think provide an excellent summary of the incident. On March 7th, the Apache Struts announces the vulnerability and releases a patch. On the following day, the Department of Homeland Security alerted Equifax to this critical vulnerability. Equifax Global Threat and Vulnerability Management Team, GTVM, emailed this alert to over 400 people within Equifax's organization, instructed anyone who had Apache Struts running on their systems to apply the necessary patch within 48 hours. The Equifax GTVM team also held a March 16th meeting about this vulnerability. Despite the explicit official notifications and instructions to apply the patch to the vulnerable system, Equifax failed to protect its highly sensitive data, and cybercriminals methodically exploited the known vulnerability to exfiltrate the PII of millions of individuals. The attack occurred between May the 13th of 2017. It lasted for 76 days. The attackers dropped web shells, a web-based backdoor to obtain remote control over Equifax network. They then found a file containing unencrypted credentials, enabling the attackers to access sensitive data outside of the ASIS environment. The attackers were able to use these credentials to access 48 unrelated databases. Attackers sent 9,000 queries on the 48 databases, successfully locating unencrypted PII data 265 times. The attackers transferred this data out of Equifax's environment unbeknownst to Equifax. Equifax did not see the data exfiltration because the device used to monitor the ASIS network traffic had been inactive for 19 months due to an expired security certificate. And on July 29th, Equifax updated this expired certificate and immediately noticed suspicious network traffic associated with its online dispute portal and applied the patch. The next day, on July 30th, Equifax observes further suspicious activity and takes the web application offline. And finally, on September 7th, Equifax announces the data breach, revealing that PII had been compromised. The scale of the breach, affecting nearly half of the US population, shocked the public and raised serious concerns about the security practices of major credit reporting agencies. It is important to understand that what happened to Equifax was not just a technological failure, but more importantly, a failure of management and corporate governance. Here are some organizational and governance issues I believe contributed most to the breach. We'll highlight a few I found most important while researching the incident. Ineffective risk management. Equifax's risk management processes were ineffective in identifying and addressing cybersecurity risks. The company did not have a comprehensive risk assessment program with appropriate and adequate security measures that was commensurate with the company's size and high degree of sensitivity of their data. The company organizes and assimilates and analyzes data on more than 800 million consumers and more than 90 million businesses worldwide. And its databases include employee and data contributed from more than 7,100 employers. In August of 2017, 3 weeks before Equifax publicly announced the breach, their CEO boasted that Equifax was managing almost 1,200 times the amount of data held in the Library of Congress every day. They knew they were a target and did not do nearly enough to safeguard its massive amounts of sensitive data. Demonstrate extremely poor fundamental security hygiene measures. Equifax was unable to do these basic measures, such as regularly patch software and data encryption. They lacked policies and processes for identifying and patching those vulnerabilities properly. They failed to encrypt the sensitive data, both in transit and at rest, and to protect it from unauthorized access, even if a breach were to occur. There was clearly a disconnect between policy development and operational execution at Equifax. The Equifax breach in 2017 resulted from poor vulnerability in software asset management. The critical vulnerability in Apache Struts that was publicly disclosed, Equifax failed to identify those systems and patch those, thus leaving their massive amounts of personal identifiable information exposed for cyber criminals to take advantage of this vulnerability. There were several major missteps in Equifax's response to the breach. Adequate communication. Equifax's communication with consumers during the crisis was often unclear and inconsistent. The company failed to provide timely and transparent updates. As already mentioned, Equifax waited 6 weeks after discovering the breach to notify the public. This delay allowed attackers to continue exploiting the stolen data and caused widespread anxiety among affected consumers. They also had a confusing and inaccessible response website. Equifax's website for providing information and assistance to the affected consumers was poorly designed, confusing, and difficult to navigate. This made it challenging for people to access the information and resources they needed to protect themselves from fraud. Equifax could have taken steps to prevent the data breach or lessen its impact. These include improved vulnerability management that is commensurate with protecting massive amounts of highly sensitive data. They should have implemented a more robust vulnerability management program that identified and prioritized and remediated critical vulnerabilities promptly. Equifax was aware of the Apache Struts vulnerability for months before it was exploited. Applying the available patch for the Apache Struts vulnerability could have prevented the breach altogether. Additionally, identifying all systems that were vulnerable and taking them offline would have mitigated the vulnerability. Equifax lacked a complete IT asset inventory, meaning they did not know the locations of the Apache Struts applications on their network. Instead, IT had to conduct network scans, which failed to detect the software, leaving them vulnerable to intrusion. If the company would have been able to see the suspicious traffic to and from the ASIS platform much earlier, it could have potentially mitigated or prevented the data breach. Additionally, If they would have had effective network monitoring, they would have been able to mitigate the incident. They missed the 265 separate data exfiltration opportunities. And most important, in my estimation, if they were implementing a effective defense in depth strategy through their cybersecurity program, they could have prevented this breach. The defense in depth strategy significantly would have enhanced their network security. It includes a range of best practices and tools and policies that include firewalls, intrusion prevention or detection systems, endpoint detection and response, network segmentation, principle of least privilege, strong passwords with multi-factor authentication, and of course, patch management. Equifax, according to one estimation, 30 process and control failures. As mentioned, no asset or software inventory, or at least one that was complete. They had the non-functioning SSL visibility appliance with the out-of-date security certificate. There was no anomaly detection on the web servers. The custom sort rule that was created by Equifax was not tested and did not work. There were no owners assigned to the applications or databases. Again, all of these are fundamental, basic cybersecurity hygiene measures that Equifax failed to do. Here's some key lessons that I learned from the Equifax case study. To further highlight the importance of identity and access management, cybersecurity programs must exercise those more stringent access and management controls and allow access to the digital resources that an organization has to employees that need them to fulfill their job and no one else. A least privilege access policy is the safest practice with sensitive data. Also learned the importance of conducting regular vulnerability assessments and audits and to patch promptly. It should prioritize vulnerabilities those at high risk to the organization. If a patch requires testing in a non-production environment, implement the alternative solutions in the meantime and increase the monitoring of the vulnerable systems, assuming that an attack is likely. Enterprise patch and vulnerability management tools are recommended due to the benefits of automation and vulnerability remediation. It saves time and cost. There's avoidance of the manual patching errors that do occur. I also learned the importance of establishing an incident response team and making sure that they're well rehearsed. Plans should outline procedures for detecting, responding to, and recovering from incidents. You should have a well-defined incident response plan in place to respond quickly and effectively. This includes communication plans, forensic analysis, and containment measures. You should establish an incident response plan and team that is prepared to respond to a wide variety of cybersecurity incidents. I also learned that you must prioritize cybersecurity and data protection. It should not be an afterthought. It should be an integral part of an organization's culture and operations. And they should audit and review and update their cybersecurity practices to ensure they are effective against the latest threats. In doing so, identifying those latest threats, you're going to continuously monitor and improve your cybersecurity posture. You have to implement robust monitoring and detection mechanisms to identify suspicious activities and potential security breaches. Early detection can help mitigate the impact of a breach. Remember, cybersecurity is an ongoing process, not a one-time event. Organizations should continuously monitor their security posture, identify and address those new threats, and adopt their security measures accordingly. And the final lesson, and perhaps most importantly, I learned that organizations can and should use the NIST cybersecurity framework's 5 functions to analyze and improve their risk management portfolio. By adhering to the framework as a cybersecurity compliance standard, organizations can follow the gold standards of due care defined by NIST in the industry. The framework provides guidance to understand, assess, prioritize, and communicate about the cybersecurity risk and actions needed to reduce them. There's really no excuse for poor cybersecurity nowadays. You have so many sources of information that will guide you along the way, no matter the size of your organization or the environment that you host your data. In summary, the Equifax data breach was a result of the combination of organizational and governance failures, the company's failure to patch vulnerabilities, implement adequate security controls, and train employees on cybersecurity were all significant contributing factors. Additionally, Equifax's ineffective risk management, lack of transparency, and overemphasis on profitability further exasperated the situation. To fully comprehend the case's significance, I think it's important to understand what the agency actually does. Equifax is a multinational agency that operates in 15 countries. It manages the data of more than 800 million consumers and millions of organizations. These facts make it an ideal data set to commit fraud and impersonation, which highlights the degree to which Equifax should have protected their big data environment. The impact of the Equifax breach will echo for years. Millions of consumers will live with the worry that the hackers, either criminals or spies, hold the keys to their financial identity and could use them to do serious harm. The Equifax data breach was a preventable catastrophe and serves as a stark reminder to prevent similar incidents in the future. Organizations should adopt a comprehensive approach to cybersecurity that prioritizes prevention, detection, and response. It also contributed to the ongoing discussions about the need for stronger data protection regulations and greater accountability for companies that handle sensitive personal information. Finally, sensitive data, when exposed either accidentally or unintentionally, has real world ramifications. Business leaders must ensure continual improvement to their security programs to mitigate risk to individuals and organizations. Thank you very much for your time and attention.